The Lighting Runner. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Could Not Stand Still. The city of Athens smelled like bread and salt air and hot stone in the morning. Nicias knew this the way he knew everything important, not from being told, but from living it, the way a fish knows water without ever stopping to think about it. He knew the smell of Athens the way he knew the calluses on his feet, and the sound of his mother's voice, and the exact number of steps from his doorway to the Agora, the great open marketplace at the center of the city. There were 412 steps. He had counted them many times, always running, because Nicias never walked anywhere if he could help it. He was 10 years old, lean as a willow branch, with dark curly hair that his mother was always trying to flatten with olive oil, and dark eyes that were always looking somewhere just beyond where everyone else was looking. He had a gap between his two front teeth and a scar on his left knee from the time he had tried to leap over the stone wall behind the potter's workshop and had not quite made it. His feet were rarely clean. His chiton, the simple tunic that Greek children wore, was almost always dusty along the hem, and his mother, Eudora, had stopped commenting on this some time ago. "A boy who runs as much as you do," she had said once, with a resigned sort of sigh, "will simply always have a dusty hem. The gods designed it so." On the morning this story truly begins, a hot morning in late summer, in the year the Athenians counted as the first year of the 72nd Olympiad, though we would call it 490 BC, Nicias was already up before dawn. He slipped out of the small stone house where he lived with his mother, his older sister Lysandra, and usually his father Dimas, though his father had not been home in many weeks now. Nicias pressed his palm flat against the cool plaster wall as he stepped over the threshold, a habit he had picked up without knowing why, like touching the doorpost for luck. The streets of Athens in the hour before dawn were different from the streets of Athens in the day. They were narrower somehow, more mysterious. The shadows still pooled between the buildings like dark water, the first birds just beginning to test their voices. The great rock of the Acropolis rose up against the gray sky, and the half-built temples up there were silhouettes, dark shapes, against the first pale smear of light in the east. Nicias ran. He ran up through the winding streets of the Kerameikos district, the potter's quarter, where the kilns were already being stoked for the day's work, and the air smelled of clay and wood smoke. He ran past the stone fountain house where the women would gather later to fill their jugs, the water still and quiet in the dark. He ran along the broad road that led south toward the coast, past the figs and olive trees whose branches overhung the low walls of the farmsteads, and he ran until his lungs were hot and his legs were singing that strange, painful good song they always sang when he pushed them hard enough. He stopped at the top of a low hill outside the city and watched the sun come up over the mountains. Athens spread below him, white and honey gold in the new light, the Agora already showing signs of life, the first carts rolling in from the countryside with vegetables and fish and clay pots, and all the business of a city beginning its day. The Acropolis rock caught the early sun and turned to copper. Beyond the city, the silver line of the sea glittered. It was beautiful. It was also, Nicias thought with a particular heaviness that had been sitting on his chest for weeks now, possibly in danger. Chapter 2. What everyone was whispering about. To understand why a 10-year-old boy was carrying something heavy in his chest when he looked at his beautiful city, you need to understand something about the world of ancient Greece and about a great empire that lay far to the east, beyond mountains and deserts and the blue Aegean Sea. The Persian Empire. In the time of Nicias, the Persian Empire was the largest, most powerful empire the world had ever seen. It stretched from the hot plains of Egypt all the way to the mountains of Central Asia, from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the valleys of the Indus River. 9,000 Athenians, perhaps 1,000 Plataeans, against 25,000 Persians with bronze armor and deadly arrows and the backing of the greatest empire in the world. Nicias stood on his hill in the early morning light and thought about his father, and about numbers, and about the way the 26 miles between Athens and Marathon felt, right now, like the longest distance in the world. Then he turned around and ran home for breakfast. Chapter 3. Lysandra has opinions. His sister was awake when he got back, sitting on the step outside their door with a bowl of olives, doing what Lysandra almost always did in her spare moments, thinking hard about something, not bothering to hide it. Lysandra was 15, 5 years older than Nicias, and she had their mother's straight dark brows and their father's square chin, and her own particular expression that Nicias thought of as the face she made when she knew she was right about something. She wore it often. "You went running again," she said, not looking up. "Yes." Nicias sat down next to her and took an olive from her bowl. She let him. "Before you ate." "I ate when I got back." "You ate one piece of bread and you called it eating." She finally looked at him. Her expression was not the "I'm right" face. It was the worried face, which Nicias liked even less because Lysandra so rarely wore it. "You've been running every morning for 2 weeks, since father left." Nicias did not say anything. "Running doesn't help, you know," she said. "It helps me," he said. Lysandra was quiet for a moment. She ate an olive and thought about this. "I suppose," she said finally, "that it helps you the way I help myself by organizing the storage room every night and then reorganizing it in the morning. It gives you something to do with all the—" She gestured vaguely at him. "All of that." "All of what?" "The worry, the energy, the—" She paused again. "You're like a river, Nicias. You need to be moving or you go strange." This was, Nicias thought, probably the nicest thing Lysandra had ever said to him, even though it didn't feel entirely like a compliment. "Have there been any messages from the army?" he asked. "None that mother has told me about." Lysandra stood up, brushing the front of her dress. "But Platos, the sandal-maker's boy, told me he heard from his uncle that the two armies are camped facing each other at Marathon, and neither side has moved yet. Just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the other one to make a mistake, I suppose, or for something to change." She looked at him steadily. "Father is a good soldier, Nicias. He trained for years. He knows what he's doing." 25,000 against 10,000, Nicias said. Lysandra's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes," she said, "that is the number." They sat with that number between them for a moment. It hung in the warm morning air like something physical. "Go wash your feet," she said at last in a tone that meant the conversation was over. "Mother will be up soon, and she'll make that face." Nicias went inside to wash his feet. As he did, he made a decision that he did not tell his sister about, because if he had told her, she would have immediately made a different kind of face, the one that meant absolutely not, and I will tell mother. He was going to Marathon. Chapter 4. 40 days of waiting. He didn't leave right away. He waited, as patiently as a boy like Nicias could wait, which was not very patiently at all. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. In truth, he was also, if he was honest with himself, waiting for courage. The road to Marathon was not a short walk. It was 26 miles through hills and valleys and mountain passes. It was a road that an army had marched down, and somewhere along that road, or at the end of it, things were happening that he was not sure he was ready to see. His father had explained war to him once. Not the exciting part, the glory and the trumpets and the heroes that the poets sang about, but the real part. The weight of the bronze shield on your arm until your shoulder burned. The terror before the battle began. The sound that a battle made, which was like nothing else in the world, his father said, like thunder that doesn't stop. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you," his father had said that evening that felt very long ago now. He had been sharpening his sword by lamplight, the slow rasp of the whetstone filling the room with its quiet rhythm. "I'm telling you so that if you're ever in a battle, You'll know that the fear you feel is the same fear every man feels, and it doesn't mean you're a coward. It means you're alive. Nicias had been 8 when his father told him this. He hadn't thought much about it at the time. He thought about it constantly now. The days passed. The heat of late summer settled over Athens like a heavy cloth. The agora was full of anxious conversations, clusters of men speaking in low voices, rumors spreading and colliding and canceling each other out. Nicias listened as he ran his errands. Because running errands was one thing he was genuinely useful for. He could cross the city in the time it took most people to walk 2 streets, and his mother relied on this during the busy weeks of the harvest. He heard the rumors. The Persian cavalry was magnificent and terrifying. The Persian archers could darken the sky with their arrows. The Persians had already burned the city of Eretria, just north of Athens, and taken its people as slaves. The Athenian generals were arguing about whether to attack first or wait for Spartan reinforcements that had been promised but hadn't arrived. A man named Miltiades, one of the 10 Athenian generals, was arguing loudly for immediate attack. The other generals were not sure. Nicias absorbed all of this and ran and waited. On the 6th day of his waiting, he did something that turned out to matter more than he knew at the time. He found the running tracks outside the city walls, the area called the gymnasium, where Athenian boys trained their bodies as well as their minds, and he ran until he couldn't run anymore, and then he pushed himself to run a little more, and then he sat in the shade of a plane tree and tried to catch his breath, and a very old man sitting nearby said to him, not looking up from the stick he was whittling, "You run like someone who thinks his feet are on fire." "I just like to run fast," Nicias said. The old man, who turned out to be a trainer, one of the men who worked with Athenian athletes preparing for the games, looked at him properly then. He had the sort of eyes that notice things, sharp and steady under heavy brows. "How long can you sustain that pace?" Nicias thought about it honestly. 2, maybe 3 miles. After that I slowed down. The old man looked back at his stick. "That's a sprinter's body running a sprinter's pace. What you want for the longer distances is different." He said nothing more for a moment, just whittled. Then, "Would you like me to show you?" His name was Ariston. He had trained athletes for 40 years. He had no students at the moment because most of the young men in Athens were either at Marathon or working to support families whose fathers were at Marathon, and he had a great deal of time on his hands. For the next several weeks, Nicias came to the gymnasium every morning, and Ariston taught him things about running that he had never known. How to breathe through difficult effort, not in desperate gasps, but in long, controlled pulls of air, filling the bottom of your lungs first and the top. How to swing your arms in a way that drove your legs forward instead of wasting the motion to the sides. How to find a running pace that felt easy enough to maintain for miles and miles, slower than your fastest, but fast enough to cover ground quickly. The pace that distance runners called the rhythm, the place where your body seemed to find its own engine and could go on and on and on. Most importantly, Ariston taught him something about pain. Pain is a message, the old trainer said one afternoon when Nicias had pushed himself very hard and was bent double with his hands on his knees. Your body sends it to your mind to say, something is happening here. Your job is to listen to the message and decide what it means. Some pain says stop, but most pain, the pain of effort, the burning in your lungs and legs, that pain just says, you're working hard. And working hard is not a reason to stop. Nicias filed this away in the part of his mind where he kept important things. Chapter 5. The Messenger. On the 40th day after the Persian fleet had landed, Nicias heard in the Agora that a runner had been sent from the Athenian generals at Marathon to Sparta, the powerful city-state in the south that had promised to send soldiers. The runner was a professional messenger, a man whose whole life's work was carrying messages swiftly across great distances. His name was Pheidippides. Nicias had seen Pheidippides once, at a race during a festival. He was a tall man with the kind of legs that looked like they had been designed specifically to cover ground, long and effortlessly smooth in their movement. He had run to Sparta, 150 miles over rough mountain roads. In 2 days, people were saying. 2 days. 150 miles. The Spartans had sent a disappointing answer. They would come, they said, but they were in the middle of a religious festival and their laws did not permit them to march to war until the full moon had passed. That would be another week, at least. The Athenian generals at Marathon could not wait that long. Miltiades had argued for attack. He had won the argument. The battle would happen soon. Nicias sat with this information and thought about his father standing in the front lines of the Athenian formation. The phalanx, the famous Greek fighting formation where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with their shields overlapping, making a wall of bronze and wood, and charged together into the enemy. He thought about the Persian arrows. He thought about 25,000 against 10,000. He thought about the road to Marathon. That night, he packed a small bag with bread and dried figs and a clay bottle of water. He tucked it under his sleeping mat. He lay down and stared at the ceiling in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the city settling into sleep. He was going in the morning. Chapter 6. The Road. He left before dawn, the same time he always left for his runs, so that no one would notice anything unusual. He paused at the door and pressed his palm flat against the plaster wall the way he always did. He looked back at the sleeping forms of his mother and sister in the dimness. "I'll be back," he whispered. He didn't know if this was true, but it felt important to say. The road to Marathon ran north and east from Athens, through the lower slopes of Mount Pentelicon, the great marble mountain whose quarries had provided the stone for the temples on the Acropolis. Nicias knew the first part of this road well. He had run it before, on his long morning runs, but he had never gone more than 5 or 6 miles before turning back. 26 miles was a different kind of journey. He ran the first miles in his best rhythm, the pace that Ariston had taught him, steady and controlled, breathing long and low. The dawn came as he climbed through the foothills, the sky brightening behind the mountains ahead, the city falling away below him, and there was a moment of pure wild joy in it. The open road, the cool morning air, his own body moving well, the world wide and enormous and full of possibility. Then the road got harder. The road to Marathon was not smooth. It wound up through rocky passes between the mountains, places where the footing was uneven and his ankles had to work constantly to compensate, places where the road turned to loose stones that slipped under his feet. There were stretches of deep shade and narrow valleys where the air was cool and damp, and then sudden open plateaus where the sun hammered down on his shoulders. He passed through 2 small villages, sleepy places, almost empty, most of the men presumably either at Marathon or else watching the road for news. At about the halfway point, his legs sent him a message. They said, "We are getting tired." He listened to the message and decided what it meant. This pain, he thought, this heavy leg burning pain, this is just effort. This is not a reason to stop. He slowed his pace a little. He ate some of the bread from his pack. He drank carefully from his water bottle, not too much, the way Ariston had taught him. And he kept moving. He was about 3 miles from Marathon when he smelled it. The smell was difficult to describe. It was like the smell of a blacksmith's forge, hot and metallic, mixed with something burnt, and under it something else, something that made him slow to a walk without quite deciding to. That made the back of his neck prickle and his heart clench with a sudden cold certainty. The smell of a battle that had already happened. He crested the last hill and looked down at the plain of Marathon. Chapter 7. The Plain. The plain of Marathon was beautiful, in a terrible way. It was a broad, flat crescent of land between the mountains and the sea, perhaps 2 miles across, edged on one side by a marsh full of reeds, and on the other by the small curved bay where the Persian fleet sat at anchor. The morning light was very bright on the water, and the ships were so numerous that from a distance they looked almost like a floating city, mast upon mast disappearing into the haze. But most of the ships were moving. Nicias saw this first and didn't understand it. Then he looked at the plane itself, and he did understand. The Persian army was retreating. The Greeks had won. He stood very still on the hilltop for a long moment. The evidence was unmistakable. The Persian soldiers, he could see them now, small moving figures in their colorful armor, far across the plain, were streaming toward the beach, toward the ships, loading and launching. There were bodies in the field, some of them far too still. The Greek army was visible as a mass of bronze and wood along the center of the plain, and there was shouting and movement, and the distant sound of trumpets, and Nicias thought for one wild second that his legs might simply carry him down the hill without any decision from him at all. He ran down toward the Greek lines. He was stopped. Of course he was stopped, because there were guards, by two Athenian soldiers at the edge of the field who crossed their spears and looked at him with the exhausted suspicion of men who had been in a battle and were not yet sure it was truly over. "Boy," one of them said, "where do you come from?" "Athens," Nicias said. He was breathing hard from his run down the hillside. "My father is a soldier. Demes, of the Oinius tribe. I came to—" He stopped. Why had he come? He had not quite worked this out. "I wanted to know if he was alive." The two guards exchanged a look. The taller one had blood on his shield arm. Not his own blood, or maybe not. It was impossible to tell. "What did you walk 26 miles for this? You should have waited." "I ran," Nicias said. Another look between the guards. A different kind of look this time. "You ran from Athens?" "Yes." "The whole way?" "Yes." The shorter guard made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a sound of disbelief. "All right, boy. What's your father's name again?" "Demes, of the Oinius tribe. He's a middle-aged man with a beard that goes gray on the left side. He's a spearman." "Wait here," said the taller guard, and went into the camp. Nicias waited. He was very tired, and his legs were heavy and shaking slightly, the particular deep tiredness of hard effort. But he was standing up, and he told himself that was what mattered. Around him, the camp was alive with the controlled, chaotic movement of an army that has just won a major battle and is now figuring out what to do next. Men moved past carrying things, talking loudly, some of them celebrating, some of them quiet with the inward look of people processing something enormous. He looked around at the faces for his father. He didn't see him. The taller guard came back. "Your father's name is on the live roll," he said. "He's in the eastern sector, across there. Do you see the red horsetail crest on that standard? Head for that." Nicias didn't walk. He ran. Chapter 8. Father. His father was sitting against a rock, eating a piece of hard bread with the systematic focus of someone whose body has told them very clearly that it needs fuel, and it needs it now. He was alive. He was whole. He had a cut on his forehead that had been bandaged with a strip of cloth, and his shield had a large crack running across its face, wood showing through the paint, and he was covered in the fine pale dust of Marathon that seemed to have settled over everything and everyone on the plain. He was, to Nicias, the most beautiful sight in the world. When he saw his son running toward him across the camp, Demes went very still. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across his face that was not an expression Nicias had words for. It was too complicated for a single word. Then he stood up and caught Nicias in both arms and held on with the grip of a man who has recently been reminded what it means to be alive. "Nicias," he said, into the top of his son's head. "What in the name of Zeus are you doing here?" "I ran from Athens," Nicias said, into his father's shoulder. "I wanted to know if you were alive." A long pause. Your mother is going to kill me for letting you do this. You didn't let me. You didn't know. Then she'll kill you. Probably, Nicias agreed. He stepped back and looked at his father properly. The cut on the forehead, the cracked shield, the exhaustion in his eyes. Are you all right? I am, his father said. I am now. He looked at Nicias with that complex expression again. How did you run 26 miles? That's not a morning run, boy. I've been training, Nicias said, for weeks. A man named Ariston taught me about distance running, about the rhythm. His father raised his eyebrows, or the eyebrow that wasn't covered by bandage. Ariston the trainer. I know that man. He worked with the Olympic runners years ago. He shook his head slowly. Sit down. Eat something. You look like a wrung-out sponge. Nicias sat down and ate hard bread and listened to his father tell him what had happened at Marathon. Chapter 9. The Battle. The story of the Battle of Marathon was not quite what the poets would later make of it, his father said. The poets always talked about glory and heroes and the thunder of the charge. The reality was more complicated. The two armies had faced each other for 8 days without fighting. 8 days of waiting in the dust and heat, staring at each other across the plain. The Persian generals had kept their massive cavalry, their horsemen, separate from their infantry, and the Greek generals had been waiting for the moment when the cavalry was not a factor. That moment had come. The Persian cavalry had been moved to embark on ships, possibly to be sent around the coast for a surprise attack on Athens, while the main army held the Athenians at Marathon. It was a clever plan, but General Miltiades had seen the movement and recognized the opportunity. He gave the order to attack, Nicias' father said. He had finished his bread and was turning a small stone over and over in his fingers, the way men sometimes do when they're retelling something difficult. And we ran. You ran at them. Yes, the standard Greek tactic is to approach an enemy at a walk, the phalanx tight together, shield to shield. But if we walked, their archers would have time to work on us. And he paused. There were a great many archers. So Miltiades ordered us to run the last part of the field, about a mile. Nicias thought about running a mile. Then he thought about running that mile with a heavy bronze shield on your arm and a spear in your hand and an enormous Persian army ahead of you with arrows. Were you frightened? His father looked at him steadily. I remembered what I told you years ago, that every man is frightened, that the fear means you're alive. A pause. Yes, I was very frightened, and I ran anyway. The battle itself had been fierce and bloody. The center of the Greek line had struggled. The Persians were strongest there, and the fighting had been brutal. But the Greek wings, the two ends of the phalanx, had pushed through and then curled inward, surrounding the Persian center. The Persians, suddenly fighting on 3 sides at once, had broken and run for the ships. The Greeks had won. The cost was real. 692 Athenian soldiers had died. Many more were wounded. The Persians had lost perhaps 6,000 men. But the Persian army had turned around and was sailing back toward its ships, and the threat to Athens, for now, was over. For now, his father said, Darius will not accept this. He will come back, or his son will. This is not the end of the story with Persia. But for today, for this day, we have won. Nicias sat with this for a while. 692 men who had families and children and lives had died today. The number was too large to hold all at once. He felt it in parts, like a weight spread across his whole body. Father, he said, how does Athens know? His father frowned. What do you mean? Athens doesn't know what happened. They're waiting. They've been waiting for 40 days, and they still don't know if you've won or lost. He thought about his mother's face at breakfast every morning, carefully not letting her worry show. He thought about Lysandra reorganizing the storage room at night. He thought about the people in the Agra whispering and calculating numbers. Someone needs to tell them. His father stared at him. Then he said slowly, "A messenger. We need to send a messenger back to Athens before the Persian ships can get there. If the Persians get around the coast and land near Athens while Athens doesn't know we've won, while Athens doesn't know the army is marching back, people might panic," Nicias said, "or surrender." Yes. His father's voice had gone very quiet. Or surrender. They looked at each other. "The fastest man we have," his father said, "is Pheidippides." But Pheidippides ran to Sparta and back. 300 miles. And he got back only 2 days ago. He's rested, or he should be, but he stopped, stood up. "Wait here." But Nicias, being Nicias, did not wait there. Chapter 10. Pheidippides. He followed his father across the camp to the command area, where the 10 generals were gathered under a temporary awning of stretched cloth, their aides and officers moving around them like bees around a hive. General Miltiades was easy to pick out. He was the one doing most of the talking, a broad-shouldered man with a commanding voice that carried even through the general noise of the camp. "The fleet is moving," someone was saying. "If they sail for Athens." "They'll sail for Athens," Miltiades said flatly. "This is what I would do. Load the cavalry and send them to the undefended city. They'll know our army can't march 26 miles quickly enough to stop them. If Athens falls before we get back, then we need a runner," said another voice. Nicias saw Pheidippides at the edge of the group. He was a tall man, as Nicias remembered. Very tall, with the characteristic body of a distance runner, built for efficiency rather than power. He looked, Nicias thought, like a man who had run 300 miles in the last week, which he had. He looked tired, but he was standing straight. "I can run," Pheidippides said. His voice was calm. "Give me the message, and I'll go." Pheidippides. Demas pushed forward into the group, Nicias following in his wake. "Your feet." Pheidippides. Demas pushed forward into the group, Nicias following in his wake. "Your feet." A pause. Pheidippides looked down at his feet, and so did everyone else. And Nicias saw it then. The bandages, white cloth spotted with dark red, wrapped around both feet. He had not noticed this before. "The road to Sparta," Pheidippides said, carefully, "has particular stones in the mountain passes. Your feet are bleeding through the bandages," Demas said. "They'll heal. Not in time to run 26 more miles without making them." Demas stopped. He was not a man who minced words, but this particular word seemed to be sticking. Not in time to run without making them worse. Pheidippides finished for him. His voice was still calm. "I am aware of this, Demas. I am also aware that if I don't run, Athens doesn't know. Do you want to tell me which matters more?" The silence that followed this was the silence of men who know an argument has been settled. Nicias heard himself say, "I'll run with him." Every head in the group turned to look at the small, dusty boy who had appeared at the elbow of the soldier named Demas. "This is my son," Demas said in a tone that contained several conflicting emotions at once. "Your son ran from Athens this morning," said one of the generals. Aristides, Nicias would learn later, called the Just for his fairness. A serious man with steady eyes. "By his own account." "Did he?" Demas said, not a question. He looked at Nicias with an expression that was complicated in ways Nicias didn't entirely know how to interpret. "He ran from Athens," Miltiades said slowly. He was looking at Nicias with the assessing eyes of a military man calculating resources. "In what time?" "I don't know exactly," Nicias said. "I left before dawn. I arrived perhaps 2 hours ago." The sun was still morning low. The generals looked at each other. Even by generous calculation, That was a very fast time for 26 rough miles for someone of any age, let alone a 10-year-old. He's been training, his father said. He sounded, Nikias thought, almost surprised by this fact, as though hearing it stated aloud made it more real. With Ariston. Ariston the trainer, Aristide said. He looked at Nikias again, more carefully. Can you run back, boy? Back to Athens. Another 26 miles, after what you've already done today. Nikias thought about it honestly. His legs were tired. His feet hurt. He had eaten some bread and drunk some water, but he was not exactly well rested. The sensible thing would be to say no, to rest, to let Phytopides go alone and damaged and trust that he would make it. He thought about his mother's face at breakfast. He thought about Lysandra and in the storage room. He thought about the people in the Agra calculating terrible numbers. He thought about what Ariston had said. Some pain says stop. But most pain, the pain of effort, that pain just says you're working hard. And working hard is not a reason to stop. Yes, he said, I can run back. Phytopides looked at him. His expression was unreadable for a moment. Then something in it shifted. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing a very tired man who was about to run 26 miles on injured feet could manage. Then we go together, he said. Chapter 11. The start. They left Marathon in the late morning. The generals had given them the message verbally. It was not a written message, because a written message could be captured, and what the message contained was too important to be captured. Nikias was to listen carefully and memorize it, and at the end Phytopides had tested him on it twice, listening to him repeat it back with the focused attention of a professional. The message was this: Nike. The Athenians have won at Marathon. The Persian fleet is retreating but may sail for Athens. Send every available man to Phaleron Bay. Do not surrender. We are coming. Nike, the Greek word for victory, the single most important word in the world right now. The camp sent them off with a strange mixture of celebration and solemnity. Soldiers called out to them, some of them cheering. Nikias's father walked with them to the edge of the camp. He looked at Nikias for a long moment. Your mother, he said, will want to know I'm alive. Tell her. Tell Lysandra. I will, Nikias said. His father put his hand on his head briefly, the way he had done when Nikias was small. Run fast, he said. I know how, Nikias said. He turned and ran. Phytopides ran beside him, and the road stretched away ahead of them through the yellow hills, and Athens was 26 miles away, and the Persian fleet was somewhere on the water behind them, and everything depended on who got there first. Chapter 12. Running together. For the first few miles, they didn't speak. Running at a hard pace doesn't lend itself to conversation. Your breath is needed for other things. But Nikias found himself thinking very loudly, if that makes sense, as he ran alongside the famous messenger. He watched Phytopides run and thought about what he was seeing. The professional runner's style was extraordinary. Despite his injured feet, despite his fatigue, despite everything, Phytopides moved with an economy that was almost disturbing to watch. Nothing wasted, nothing extra, every movement serving the forward momentum. His breathing was so controlled it was almost invisible from the outside. He ran like a man who has made a deep peace with running, who has gone beyond the stage of effort and entered some other stage where the running just happens. Nikias tried to match him and mostly couldn't. He was faster in short bursts. He could pull ahead on the downhills and over short flat sections. But Phytopides had a consistency, a metronomic steadiness on the uphills and rough terrain that Nikias had to work hard to stay close to. After 3 miles, he stopped trying to match him exactly and instead settled into his own best rhythm, the one Ariston had taught him, and tried to keep Phytopides visible ahead of him. The hills were harder the second time through. There was a fundamental difference between running 26 miles fresh and running them on legs that had already run 26 miles. Nicias's muscles knew this difference very well and were loudly communicating it to him. His thighs burned. The bottoms of his feet were tender in ways that made him very careful about his foot placement on the rough sections of the road. There was a new kind of tiredness, deep in his body, settled into his bones. That was different from ordinary tiredness, and would not be fixed by slowing down. The only thing that would fix it was stopping. He didn't stop. He thought about his mother. He thought about Lysandra reorganizing the storage room. He thought about the people in the Agora, and about the Persian ships, and about the word Nike, and about his father's hand on the top of his head, and about 692 men who had died on that flat plain by the sea so that Athens could get this news. He ran. Chapter 13. The Mountain Pass. The hardest section of the road came at about the midpoint, a long uphill climb through a rocky pass between two ridges, where the road narrowed to a track barely wide enough for a cart, with loose stones underfoot and no shade from the noon sun. This was where Nicias almost stopped. He had come around a bend in the road and seen the pass ahead of him, and felt something inside him do what he could only describe as going very quiet, not giving up exactly, but something like his body saying, "Look at this. Look at how much more there is. This is a great deal." Phytopides had stopped just ahead. He was standing with his hands on his knees, breathing. When he straightened up, he looked back at Nicias with an expression that was very tired and very honest. "My feet," he said simply. Nicias came up to stand beside him. They were at a switchback in the trail, a spot where the road curved back on itself to gain altitude, and from here they could see back the way they had come. Miles of road and hills, and far below and behind the faint blue glitter of the bay at Marathon. And somewhere out there, out on that water, the Persian ships. "Can you continue?" Nicias asked. "Can you?" Phytopides asked, which was not exactly an answer. Nicias looked at his legs, which were shaking slightly now with the sustained effort. He looked at the pass. He thought about what was on the other side of the pass. The downhill run into the coastal valleys, and then the road widening again as it approached Athens. "Ariston told me something," he said. He was a little out of breath, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. He said, "Pain is a message, and you have to listen and decide what kind." "What kind is this?" Phytopides said. He was listening, Nicias realized. Not dismissively, the way an adult sometimes listens to a child as a polite gesture before doing whatever they were going to do anyway. Actually listening. "This kind," Nicias said, "says we're very tired. It doesn't say we can't." A long pause. The wind moved through the rocky pass above them, a cool current in the still heat of the afternoon. "That's a good teacher you have," Phytopides said. He straightened up all the way. "Let's go." They went. The pass was brutal. Nicias had to slow to barely more than a walk on the steepest sections, arms pumping, head down, watching his feet. Phytopides moved ahead of him. Somehow, on those ruined feet, on that impossible slope, the professional runner found something. Some reserve, some deep well of trained endurance that ordinary willpower isn't quite the same as but is perhaps related to. He climbed. Nicias climbed behind him. At the top of the pass, they both stopped for a moment to breathe. From here, the whole great view spread before them. The mountains dropping away to the west, the plain of Attica opening up, the city visible in the haze as a collection of light shapes on the low hills, and beyond the city, the silver arc of the sea. And further out where the sea curved toward the horizon, he couldn't be sure, but he thought he might be able to see sails, small dark shapes far away. "We have to hurry," Phytopides said quietly. "I know," Nicias said. They ran down the other side of the pass. Chapter 14. The long descent. Running downhill when your legs are very tired is not the relief it sounds like. The impact of each downhill stride jars your body in ways that uphill running doesn't. And after 20-something miles, Nikias's knees and ankles were using language he didn't previously know they had. But the pace was faster now, the road was smoother, and below them, Athens was growing steadily larger and more real. They passed through the small village of Pallene, and people came out to look at them. Two runners, one large and one small, moving at a pace that attracted attention, covered in dust, and clearly not out for a morning jog. "Is there news from Marathon?" An old woman called from a doorway. "Nike," Nikias shouted back without slowing. The word felt enormous coming out of his mouth, like something much larger than himself. Victory. Tell everyone. He heard a sound begin behind him as he ran, a kind of noise that started with the old woman and spread through the village like a wave, wordless and swelling. It followed him for a little while before the road curved and the village fell behind. He found, with about 5 miles to go, that his legs had changed again. Not better, exactly. He was not less tired, but something had shifted. Some relationship between his body and the effort had changed, and it was as though the tiredness had become familiar, like an old companion he had gotten used to. It was there, and he was running. And both things were simply true at once, and there was no point in arguing about it. Phytopides was struggling. He was still running. The man was extraordinary. And Nikias would later tell the story of this many times, and each time marvel at it more. But he was slowing, and his stride had lost some of its efficiency, and there was a quality to his breathing now that was not quite right. Not the controlled rhythm of earlier, but something rougher and more desperate. His feet, Nikias knew, must be in tremendous pain. At 4 miles out, Nikias pulled up alongside him. "I know a faster route through the northern district," Nikias said. He was breathing hard, but his voice was working. "I run it every morning. I know every corner." Phytopides looked at him sideways. His face was gray with exhaustion under the dust. "Lead," he said. So Nikias led. Chapter 15. Home. The last 4 miles were the strangest of Nikias's life. He ran through his own city, past the places he knew like the back of his hand, the fountain house and the potter's workshops, and the narrow streets of the Kerameikos, and the city was already beginning to know that something was happening. Word had somehow preceded them. The way news moves in a city, person to person, whisper to whisper, and people were coming out of their doors and shops and into the streets, looking east along the road, asking each other and being told and asking again. Nikias could hear the noise of it building around him as he ran. It sounded like a tide coming in. He ran through the narrowest streets, the routes he knew, the corners he had taken 1,000 times at dawn, and people pressed to the sides to let him pass and called after him, and he answered as he ran. "Nike, Nike, Marathon. We won." Asterisk. His voice was very rough now, barely more than a shout, but it carried. He ran into the Agora. The great open marketplace of Athens was full of people. The news was moving faster than he was now, and people were already gathering. And the sound was enormous, a sound made of hundreds of voices all doing different things at once, crying, shouting, asking, answering, calling out names. Nikias ran through the edge of it, still moving, and stopped at the center of the space where the speaking platform stood. He found he didn't need the platform. People had seen him, had recognized, somehow, that this was the runner, the one who had brought the news, and there was a sudden concentric hush spreading from him outward through the crowd, a circle of quiet in a sea of noise, and every face in that circle was turned toward him, and they were all waiting. He took 3 breaths. He thought, "Nike." He shouted it, "Nike." And a word went up from the Agora of Athens like a bird released, and the sound that answered it from the crowd was something that Nikias would carry inside him for the rest of his long life, something he could never quite describe to anyone who wasn't there, because there are no words that are quite the right shape for it. The word for victory had never, in all the history of that word, been more true. Chapter 16. Phaedopides. Phaedopides arrived in the Agora perhaps 3 minutes after Nicias, and when the crowd saw the state of him, the enormous man gray with exhaustion, the blood on his bandaged feet, they fell silent again in a different kind of hush, a hush of witnessing something at the very edge of what a human body can do. He stopped in the middle of the Agora. He was swaying slightly. He looked at the crowd around him with a steady, distant expression, the expression of a man who has traveled very far inside himself and is just now beginning to come back. He said clearly, "We have won." Then he sat down. The doctors were there quickly. Athens was not unprepared for this moment, even if they had not known it was coming. And Phaedopides was surrounded almost immediately by people who knew what to do for a man who had run himself to the very edge of his body's limits. He was given water and food and laid in the shade. Later accounts would say that Phaedopides died in the Agora that day, saying only the word Nike before he collapsed. Nicias always found this account difficult to square with what he had seen. Phaedopides had been exhausted and injured and at the absolute limit of his endurance. This was certainly true. But he had also been, Nicias believed, far too stubborn a man to die of a run. What Nicias knew was that by the time he had finished telling the crowd all the details of the battle, his father's account, the charge, the encirclement, the victory, Phaedopides was propped up against the base of the column of the speaking platform, drinking water from a large cup, and when Nicias came to sit beside him, the tall runner looked at him with the steady gaze of someone who has recently returned from a very far place, but is decidedly still present. "Good work," Phaedopides said. "You too," Nicias said. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the city celebrate around them. Chapter 17. Mother. His mother found him before he found her. He was moving through the crowd, looking for her face, when a hand closed very firmly on his shoulder from behind and spun him around. And there was Eudora, his mother, who was a small, calm woman in ordinary times, who kept her worry carefully hidden at breakfast and her fear organized into practical action. And she was not calm now. She was not calm in the slightest. She held him at arm's length and looked at him, all of him, very quickly, as mothers look at children who have been somewhere they shouldn't. And then she pulled him into the kind of hug that is less an expression of affection than a kind of anchoring, a physical declaration that you are here and you are staying. 26 miles, she said into his hair. Her voice was shaking very slightly. You ran 26 miles and did not tell me you were going. I didn't want you to worry. That is the most spectacularly misguided logic I have ever heard from you, she said, and you have produced a great deal of misguided logic in 10 years. She stepped back and looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Your father. Alive, he said immediately. He's fine. He has a cut on his head. Small, already bandaged. He said to tell you he's coming home. His mother closed her eyes for just a moment. One slow exhale. Then she opened them and looked at Nicias with an expression that was so complicated it would have taken him a long time to fully decode it. But the primary ingredient was love, plain and enormous, and the secondary ingredient was relief so strong it had temporarily taken the shape of anger. When he gets back, she said, carefully, I am going to have words with your father about your training. Ariston taught me, Nicias said. The trainer. I know who Ariston is. A pause. You could have been killed. You could have gotten lost. You could have fallen on the mountain road. There are wild places up there where a boy could. But I didn't, Nicias said. Mother, I didn't. I'm here. She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she made a decision. And it was final. Chapter 18. Lysandra. His sister was waiting outside their house. She was doing her best to look like someone who had just happened to be standing in the street and was not, for instance, watching anxiously for her brother. She was not entirely succeeding at this. When she saw him, she did something Nikias had not seen her do in years. She completely abandoned her expression and just looked openly at him. And then, for about half a second, something moved across her face that was the 15-year-old version of what Nikias's mother had just shown him. Then she folded her arms and tilted her chin up slightly. "So," she said, "you went." "I went," Nikias said. "And father, alive, coming home." The chin came down. The arms unfolded, just for a moment, just long enough to be unmistakable. His sister let out a breath that was not just relief, but something more like the release of something she'd been holding up for a very long time, and her eyes went bright and then settled, and she pressed her lips together and nodded. "Good," she said. "That's good." Then she looked at Nikias with a more familiar expression. "You ran 26 miles, there and back. 52 in total. Well, the last 26 with Pheidippides. Pheidippides." A pause. The Pheidippides. He had injured feet. I helped navigate the last section. Lysandra stared at him. Something was happening behind her eyes. He could see it. The rapid processing, the reorganization of her understanding of certain facts. "When you said you'd been training every morning for 2 weeks, I just liked running," Nikias said honestly. "I didn't plan this. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to be a messenger. I needed to know if father was alive, and I could run faster than anyone I knew, and the army needed someone to carry the news, and it happened." His sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said something he had not expected. "I know," she said. "I know you didn't plan it, but I want you to understand something about what you did today." She spoke slowly, carefully, the way she did when she was saying something she'd been thinking about for a while. "The message mattered, Nikias, not just for our family, for everyone. If the Persian ships had reached Athens before the news arrived, people might have given up, panicked, the city might have surrendered. Everything father and those 692 men died for." She stopped, took a breath. "You helped make it matter." Nikias hadn't thought about it quite this way. He thought about it now. "I just ran," he said. "You just ran," Lysandra agreed. 26 miles, on tired legs, over mountain roads, to tell an entire city that everything was going to be all right. A pause. Some things are just running, and some running is history. She looked at him one more moment, and the complicated expression softened into something simpler and warmer, the kind of look his sister gave him rarely, but that he valued precisely because it was rare. "You smell terrible," she said. "Go inside and wash." He went inside and washed. Chapter 19. What happened next? The Athenian army marched back from Marathon that same afternoon, despite their exhaustion, moving as quickly as soldiers can after a battle. They arrived at Phaleron Bay, the harbor south of Athens, just in time. The Persian ships, which had indeed sailed around the coast, hoping to find an undefended city ripe for attack, arrived to find the Greek army waiting on the shore. The Persians looked at this for a while, turned their ships around, and sailed home to Persia. Athens was safe. Not permanently, as Nikias's father had predicted. This was not the end of the conflict with Persia. The Persians would return 10 years later, led by Darius's son Xerxes with an even larger army. The Greeks would face them again at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, and at a sea battle called Salamis, and ultimately the Persians would be pushed back for good. But that is a different story, full of its own extraordinary people and impossible odds and moments when history could have gone differently, and didn't. For now, in the days after Marathon, Athens celebrated. The soldiers came home. The city, which had held its breath for 40 days, finally breathed. There were festivals and sacrifices and processions to the temples, and the poets began composing the verses that would be repeated for thousands of years, telling what had happened on the plain by the sea. Nicias's father came home with a bandaged head and a cracked shield, and a manner that was quieter and more careful than it had been before, the way people sometimes come back from things that changed them. He sat in the evenings in the courtyard and sometimes said nothing at all, and sometimes said a great deal, and his family gave him space and time and the particular comfort of simply being present.